I tell them in the beginning of the class, the most interesting thing that's going to happen to you in the next few months is not going to happen in your tired relationship. For 5 extra points on the final, you tell me a quote from Macbeth that captures what she just said. It's not going to happen on television. That there is no simplicity, that everything is complicated. And it's not going to happen in your celebrity conscious social media. What is the first thing Macbeth says when he and Banquo walk out on the heath to see the witches? Give you a hint? Okay, you go for the 5.
Don't follow Faraday. I have not seen it.
That's right. So why does that quote fit what she just said?
Because today is a gloomy day.
Because the day is not what he expected. Like, he wasn't expecting that to happen that day.
How can a day be so beautiful and yet so, so dark? There are only gray areas. There's no black and white.
So there is ambiguity in everything. It's going to happen right here because we have at our fingertips all the greatest thinkers. We have at our fingertips the energy, and we're going to make it happen right here. So I try to have spontaneous things happen in the classroom. I didn't want to go to Vietnam, and so they gave me some choices. I was headed to law school and they were going to draft me, and the choices were not very attractive. One of them was that I could go teach in what they called an emergency school, a school where they couldn't find teachers. So I ended up in Bedford-Stuyvesant teaching elementary school in 1968, and the school was chaos. The teachers didn't want to be there. The students, all minorities, all African Americans, very few Caribbeans and very few Hispanics, weren't getting a good education at all. And when I was a substitute teacher, a different class every day. And one day, there was chaos going on in the classroom. There was children fighting, there was things being thrown, epithets. And I saw one little girl in the front row, and she had her hands folded with a pencil on her hand. And she came here to learn. Her parents had probably come from another part of the United States here so that she could get the American dream, and it was being taken from her. And I let out a scream you wouldn't believe. I bellowed, and those kids were so frightened at a 6'4", 200-pound man who had gone berserk that they melted into their seats, folded their hands, and got ready to learn. And I started teaching, and I've been doing it ever since for 46 years. I really think that there are things inside of me that see teaching as a calling. I think the important thing about teaching on the college level or any level is that the teacher be self-reflective. They be a reflective practitioner. They see what works, what doesn't work. And instead of going forth with the same thing that makes you comfortable day in and day out, that you should take chances. I will try something new, and if it works, I put it in my repertoire. Some of the things that I've learned about at John Jay here teaching that I haven't used before, they're connected to some of the things I've used before, are identity. I would tell the students that you have upper class, middle class, lower class, you've got all kinds of classes throughout the world, and there's a class that you may not have heard of. It's prevalent in Europe, it's not so prevalent in the United States. It's called the intelligentsia, and that's us. We are the intelligentsia in the sense that we don't measure our worth on our money. We don't measure on our clothing or our status or our athletic ability. We measure it purely on the amount of information we have and our critical thinking skills, our ability to see through propaganda, our ability to find, see the truth and act on it. And that's a mission particularly important for John Jay students who are going to go into criminal justice fields. They must have a very, very strong sense of how to think their way through all the gray areas that they're going to come across. It's not about melodrama, the good guys against the bad guys. This is not a film. This is society. People are intricate, people are interesting, and they must be considered so. So the intelligentsia, its identity. I actually have a club called the Intelligentsia Club. What we do is we read classic books, we go to the museums, and we do the kinds of things that people in popular culture would not do. Things that we stayed up. The other night we watched a movie called The Heiress from 1949 in an all-night movie session here at John Jay. I have an all-night reading session called Midnight Madness, in which we read Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment from 11 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning. The adventure of it, the newness of it, the fact that you're establishing yourself as a thinker, as a person who can deal with the details, the minutiae. I tell my students the devil is in the details. It's not in the inspiration. People, you have a dream at night. In this school, in this class, in this life, you plan. You work on things small bits at a time, and you achieve your goals that way. It's not by some inspirational thing that dawns on you. My students, after they do the all-night reading session, come to me and say it's the most interesting thing they did in all their years here at John Jay. And it gets harder for me as I get older and older, but I fight it because it is exciting, it's adventurous, and young people want adventure. They need intellectual adventure. That's why my class can be interrupted in a minute, and I'll see something about stop and frisk, or I'll see something about another issue, and it'll turn into a debate. And I'll call the two students to the front of the room, and I'll have them give an opening statement and a rebuttal. And I'll tell the other students in the class, you are the Supreme Court justices. I want you to write an opinion on the argument you just had. And I want you to call yourself Justice Anderson. I want you to call yourself Justice Mendoza. I want you to submit that to me. I don't want you to use precedent. I want you to use what you know about the law, what you know about society, and what you know about the Constitution in your decision. And so all of a sudden it becomes something theatrical. It becomes something inspiring and interesting, and that's what I live for. I will ask them if I said, you haven't read the book, the whole book, and nothing but the book, so help you God. And they'll be like, I can't believe the teacher's speaking this way in this heightened manner. So a student will ask me a question, I'll say, you and I, we've been through that, and this is not our fate, so let us not talk falsely now. The hour is getting late. And I'll come up with rhymes or characters. When I'm talking about McCarthy, during the McCarthy hearings in 1950, I said it wasn't an old war, it's a cold war. And I'd spin around and I have an envelope, and I have here a list of communists. They're communists in the government. And I can do a voice somewhat like McCarthy. And I play McCarthy, and then I play the man who stood up to him in the Army versus McCarthy hearings, the lawyer Welch. And are you going to bring this man in front of our committee? And the lawyer looked at him and looked him in the eye with all of America watching on television for the first time and said, no, sir, I don't think I will. At long last, Senator, have you no sense of decency? And just those little chosen moments will get the students running off to see the video. We'll get the students running off to do their kinds of research. So you can use some of those theatrical moments in class just to make sure. I tell them in the beginning, I will not bore you. You have to establish also a very sensitive atmosphere where excellence is rewarded, but mistakes are not chastised, and people's confidence is not destroyed by trying to do something that they don't quite achieve. You don't want to praise people and say they're right when they're not, because then you've devalued the people who have thought the thing through clearly. But you need to give respect. We had an argument yesterday, very, very intense argument between the former military men in my classroom who believed that you don't tell, you don't snitch, you don't report, you don't whistle blow on anyone, no matter if there's been a shooting of a family in a house because maybe that family had tried to attack you before, and the more liberal members of my class who believed that Snowden and Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers were patriots. That conversation between those two groups of people, it was very important that you maintain the dignity of all people, and that the way that the discussion is conducted is mindful of critical thinking. It's not personal. These are issues. I had a student in my class last semester, a few semesters ago, and we were having a discussion about the Danish cartoons, in which there were cartoons which were disrespectful to the Prophet Muhammad, and there was a lot of violence that ensued. And the discussion was about freedom of speech versus religious people's right not to be mocked and not to have blasphemous things written about them. And about halfway through the conversation, he was one of the members of the Muslim Students Association. He paused and he said, you know what? I've just changed my mind, and I was against the cartoons, and I'm still against them, but I'm for freedom of speech, of course, and freedom of speech. Those kinds of, when you create an atmosphere in which people feel comfortable to change their mind in the middle of the discussion, that means that they're not trying to be right. They're trying to get to the right. And that's thrilling to me. Several students, or a handful of students, that want to be teachers. And I tell them it's a really underrated profession. It's great to be a lawyer, it's great to be a business person, an accountant, but being a teacher is, it's a gift in itself, because I come to work and what do I deal with? I deal with young people who have aspirations. My job is to help them to reach those aspirations. My job is to find out what is going to energize them and what is going to move them to the next step in their life. What could be more fun when you see young people, the spark going off in their eyes. And you see a spark going off in their eyes to people who, to me, have been dulled by this constant stream and barrage of misinformation, of social media, which is circulating around all of this stuff that's not good for them. And then it's almost like you're giving them an elixir, which is good for them. And you see them flower and you see them grow right before your very eyes. And I consider myself lucky. When I come to school, this is where I want to be. One of the interesting things in teaching is power sharing. That once you are very confident that you can react and think on your feet and that you know where you're going, then you are more apt to be able to share power in the classroom. And that's important because students need to feel as if they're driving the ship in some ways. I remember I said to my students a few years ago, I said, what's up with the tongue rings? And I was teaching public speaking. And I said, if you come in here with a tongue ring and I hear that lisp that you have because you have a ring in the tip of your tongue, I'm going to lower your grade by half a grade. And I consider it to be self-mutilation. And that's it. Cleopatra Ames raised her hand. She said, Mr. Donaldson, I'd like to point out that you're wrong for 3 reasons. Number 1, tongue rings are a generational phenomenon. And if you haven't noticed, you're rather old. Number 2, it's an ethnic phenomenon. And I'm an African American, and this harkens back to my background, my heritage, which you may have missed. And number 3, in case you hadn't noticed, I have a tongue ring. And you didn't even notice, and you gave me an A in your speech. And so I took a step back, and I pretended to be befuddled. And I made a frown. And I said, Cleopatra Eccles is absolutely correct. I am absolutely wrong. There will be no diminution of grade for tongue rings. And I went back to my work. Now, henceforth in the class, students had their hands up all the time. They were trying to change dates on tests. They were trying to change books. They felt empowered, and you could feel the fact that their intellect was being respected. It was not just a person on high giving them information. It was an exchange of consciousnesses. And those kinds of moments are important if you're confident enough to share the power in the classroom like that. Since this is a community college, one of the best things you can do is to draw the students into campus life. And one of the ways I've tried to do is I hold a weekly New York Times discussion session. I think that the New York Times is important as a source of good information. And so I have the students read the Times in the morning, we have the school purchase them, and then they come and we discuss them and we debate issues. President Travis has come, deans have come, professors have come, and to exchange ideas, to debate, to comment on an equal level with the students. And it's packed. We have 25, 30 students there every week. And the other thing I have is something called the Story Jam. I love to tell stories. I'm a born storyteller. My father was a storyteller. And I have students come in and tell stories. And we have a theme for each week. And then after their stories, I will give them tips on how to tell stories, how to keep it brief, how to not have 3 endings. You have 1 ending. You let it drop when it's over. If you wonder if people are listening to your story, stop in the middle. And if they tell you to keep going, keep going. If they don't, they're not liking your story. Don't go on. So I give them all kinds of tips on how to tell stories, and we're gaining a following for that too. That way you change the look on your face. Before you take this course, you have a look on your face like this. And after you take the course, you go like this. Damn. You'd be frowning because things are complicated. And I would just add some of the inspirational things that happened as a teacher. I was coming off the 59th Street subway platform, and I saw a bunch of police officers dressed in blue were moving a homeless man from his spot where he sits on the bench on the downtown 1 train. And one police officer was squatted next to the bench with his head cocked in a very humane way, talking with the man, because they were going to move all the man's worldly possessions in a moment. And I looked, it was one of my students. And he turned around. He said, "Professor Donaldson," and he didn't really take his eyes off the man. "How you loved your class?" That's the kind of thing I'm teaching, the kind of broad humanity-based understanding of the way society works, what our responsibilities are to each other. And when I can do that to a person who has power over other people, a police officer or a higher ranking police officer, that's the greatest gift for me.